Today, China and the United States are coming closer, step by step, to a war. And this process, with the United States being the global power, the global hegemon, and China being the emerging power, it's not. It's a situation that already occurred in history. There are many situations where you had a global power and an emerging power threatening the global power to overtake the global power on military fields or economic fields. And this situation can be described as the Thucydides. I'm sorry, I opened a small parenthesis here, just because I forgot to mention that at the end of this video we will see 5 scenarios that could lead to war between China and the United States. And this is the end of the parenthesis. Trap. And this Thucydides was a Greek historian, and he was an Athenian general during the Peloponnesian War. And he described this situation where you have a global hegemon that is kind of basically ruling the world or the civilization, and you have an emerging power that is gaining a lot of power, economic power, military power, and is threatening the global power to overtake the first place. And so there is a political scientist named Graham Allison, and he studied over 500 years of history, 16 situations from back in I think the first case he studied was in the 15th century and until nowadays, and he studied 16 similar situations where you have a global power in place and an emerging power that wants to become the global power and overtake the hegemon. And out of 16 situations like this, 12 of them ended in wars. So if you look at statistics, well, there is a higher probability that China, the rivalry between China and US, will end in a war. But to clearly understand the aspects of this Thucydides trap, we have to study some of those situations to clearly understand what could determine the outcome of this rivalry between China and US. And at the end of this video, we will see 5 scenarios that could lead to a war between China and US. So, to start, the very first situation was the one that was seen by its own eyes by Thucydides, and it's the war between Sparta and Athens. And to give you a bit of historical context about this rivalry between Athens and Sparta, you have to understand that you have 2 main powers. The first power, the global hegemon, was Sparta. And to understand Sparta, you have to know that it's a military power, but they don't have navy. All of their military power is based on ground force, and their military technology they developed, it's hoplites. And everything in their life is based on war. This hoplite technique of fighting is you have a shield, you know, and there is kind of a few Spartans next to each other holding a shield. It makes kind of a wall, you know, and they hold spears and they move forward like this. So you cannot touch them while they can hit you. And this was their technique. And it was not just their technique that was good, but because everything in their life was based to become a good fighter. And the thing is, if they wanted to devote themselves to this military training, they couldn't spend their time in the fields, grow crops and harvest them. So they had slaves called hilots. And basically there was a lot of hilots for every Spartan. We estimate that for one Spartan, there was 10 hilots. So it's a lot. And this was one of the major weaknesses of Spartan because, well, they was always afraid of those hilots protesting against them because they were slaves. So if they revolted, this could lead to some internal problems in Sparta. And to give you some other details about their mindset of those Spartans, when there was a war, the Spartan mother told their son, "You must come back with your shield. Either you come back with your shield with you or you come back on your shield." Because at this time, it was a great dishonor to flee the battlefield. It was better to die on the battlefield as a warrior than to leave the battlefield as someone afraid of dying. So this is why they said this sentence, because if you come back with your the thing is, if you leave the battlefield, the first thing you leave and you throw to the ground is your shield. So if you come back with your shield, it means that you were courageous enough to hold it and to fight until the end. And if you come back with your shield, it means that you fought well. And if you come back on your shield, it means that you died next to your shield and they are bringing your body back to Sparta. And this is a great honor. There is no greater honor for a Spartan to die on the battlefield. This is their mindset. And so you have Sparta. The problem with Sparta is that they don't have navy. And Greece is a bit like this, you know. Sorry, I don't draw really well, but it's something like this, and you have an isthmus here, and here you have a lot of islands. And here you also have other islands, and here you have Persia. So Sparta was the global hegemon. It was the main power in Greece at this time. But the problem is that they didn't have navy. So to overcome this problem, they create a league called the League of Peloponnese. And this was mainly a defensive alliance between Sparta and its allies like Corinthia and others. And this was to benefit from the navy of other city-states that could. It was a defensive alliance, you know, so if one of the allies had a problem, a a military problem on the ground, the Spartan could help. And Sparta was here on this isthmus, and you have Athens. I think Athens is here, and here you have Corinth. Okay, and here you have all of those islands. And so Sparta, they created the League of Peloponnese. It was a mutual benefit alliance. There was no, it was not Sparta that was ruling the alliance and taking too much benefits from the alliance. So this is for Sparta. This is their league. And on the other hand, you have Athens. The problem with Athens is that Athens helped to fight against the Persians and to win over the Persians, so to prevent them to take over Greece. And as they helped to take over Greece, they felt that they wanted to be recognized as the power they felt they were. So after winning over the Persians, they created a league called the League of Delos. And Athens at this time, they have the most powerful navy in Greece. And so what they did with the League of Delos and the League of Peloponnese are the two main leagues of Greece at this time. And the League of Delos is radically different from the League of Peloponnese. The League of Delos is Athens goes to those islands, and Athens tells those islands, okay, if you don't want to be annoyed by the Persians, I can defend you. But if I defend you, you either have to give me some boats to create a powerful mutual navy so we can defend all of the islands, or you send me money so I can develop my own navy and I can defend you if you have a problem. And this is what happened. And because of those islands and the Athenian navy, the economic growth of Athens was huge at this time. They made lots and lots of money. But the problem with this, with Athenian mindset is Athens at this time, they developed democracy. And what they wanted to do was to export their model of governance to all of these islands. So basically they could take decisions for those islands easily, because with democracy it's easier to influence the people of those islands to take decisions that will be to your advantage. So the League of Delos it was not as the League of Peloponnese because every island that joined the League of Delos was kind of under the protection of Athens. So Athens was leading this league and was taking all the major decisions. So, and Athens wanted to export its model to all of those islands. And the problem is that you had a great rivalry between Sparta and Athens. And they signed a peace agreement I think it was about 445 BCE. And they signed this peace agreement, and this brought a lot of wealth to Athens. This is where most of the philosopher and most of the theater, most of the cultural development of Athens happened. And nowadays, when we read some theater of some Greek tragedies, most of them they were written at this time. But the problem is, Athens didn't want it to stop here. They wanted to become the major power. So the problem is it made kind of a Cold War between Athens and Sparta, because they could not directly attack each other because of the peace treaty they signed. And so the war between those two started for several major reasons. We will study two of them. The thing is, in the League of Peloponnese and the League of Delos, you have a lot of allies. And you also have neutral city-states. And one of the city-states that is in the League of Peloponnese is Corinthia. One of the city-states that is kind of neutral is Corcyra, which we nowadays call it Corfu, I think. And the thing is, there's a problem between Corinthia and Corcyra. And Corcyra there is a first war between Corcyra and Corinthia, and Corcyra destroys Corinthia. But the problem is that Corinthia is an ally of Sparta. And so they went to see Sparta and they need some help. So Sparta, they helped them build a huge navy in order to take revenge over Corcyra. But the problem is Corcyra, they understand that Corinthia is creating a huge navy to take its revenge. So they went to seek help to Athens. And the problem is Corcyra has one of the best navy in Greece at this time. And if Corinthia was able to take over the navy of Corcyra, it would give a huge advantage to the League of Peloponnese, because League of Peloponnese is leading the ground war, but they don't have the best navy. The best navy is in the League of Delos with Athens. But this could break the balance of those two leagues in favor of the League of Peloponnese if they were able to take the control of the Corcyra's navy. So Corcyra, they went to get some help from Athens. And the problem is Athens is in front of a dilemma. If they don't do anything, they will, from their point of view, they will behave as a weak city-state, and they will give the opportunity to Sparta to take the global advantage over Greece. But if they do something, if they send help to Corcyra, this could be interpreted by Sparta as a declaration of war, because Corinthia is an ally of Sparta. So what they decide is to send a few ships, a few defensive ships. So it's what they said at this time. The ships they sent was more to represent an action rather than defending Corcyra. But the problem is this action of sending ships was interpreted by Sparta as a declaration of war. This is one of the major elements. The second major element is here. You have an isthmus and a city called Megara. And Megara was an ally of Sparta. And the isthmus is an important geographical place in Greece, because the countries out there, you have Corinthia and you have Megara, and they were able to make a lot of money by getting money from the trade routes. Because here you had a lot of trade routes here, so by taking some money for every passage out of there, they were able to make a lot of money. But the problem is Athens, they declared an economic embargo on Megara. They said, now you won't have access to any port of the League of Delos. And without having access to any port of the League of Delos, this would kill their economy. So they went to seek help from Sparta, and they complained about this Athenian behavior. And this added to the problem with Coursera. The Spartans, they considered this as not acceptable behavior, and in an assembly with generals, they declared war to Athens. I'm sorry, I had a problem with my phone. And so, yeah, I said, so Sparta declared war to Athens. The problem is they thought this war will be fast and easy, but it was not. They were at war for 3 decades, and it left Athens and Sparta completely destroyed. Basically, Athens lost the war, and Sparta won but was destroyed. And so this is the first example of this Thucydides trap. It's, to clearly understand, it's you have an emerging power that is threatening to overtake the global hegemon, which was Sparta. And the thing is, the more they grow, the more recognition they want. They want to be recognized as a great power. But the problem is the global hegemon doesn't want this emerging power to threaten them and to threaten their control over the civilization or over the world, as we can see with the China and US situation nowadays. But the thing is, this Thucydides trap is not an isolated situation. You have a lot of situations through history that showed some similarities to this situation, and we will study 2 of them. Out of the 12 situations, the similar situation that led to a global conflict and a war, we will study the Japan versus US situation that resulted in the Pearl Harbor attack, and we will study Germany versus United Kingdom that resulted in World War I. And we will end with some possible scenarios, 5 possible scenarios that could lead to a war between China and the United States. So now we will see how this Thucydides trap led to a war between Japan and US. So let me erase. So the Thucydides trap for the situation between Japan and United States. So to give you a bit of historical context about this conflict between those 2 powers, is in the middle of the 19th century, around 1850, Japan was not really developed. It was a really closed country without any... They didn't even make their industrial revolution. It was really closed on itself and not really trading with the rest of the world. But what happened is the US, with something called the gunship diplomacy. What is the gunship diplomacy? The gunship diplomacy is you have a huge navy and you have huge warships, and when there is a country that doesn't want to open trade ports, you send your navy near the coast and you tell them, okay, if you don't open your ports to international trade, we will just destroy your city. We will fire our cannons on your country and we will destroy everything. So you don't really have choice. And this is what happened with Japan. So they threatened Japan to destroy their country, and so they accepted to open trade ports. And at this time, Japan, they figured out that they were really late compared to other countries. And if they wanted to develop their country, and to be among the great power of this time, they needed to modernize and develop their country. And this is what they did. Between 1850 to 1930, their population grew a lot. It almost doubled. They earned 30 million people, and they made huge development to their economy. They modernized everything. They developed a huge army, a huge navy. And in the beginning of the 20th century, I think it was 1903 or something like this. Well, they fought a war against Russia, and they won. And this was the first time an Asian country won a war over a Western country. And why did they fought this war was, well, Japan is an island. You know, Japan is like this. And you have some islands here. But the problem is they don't have many natural resources. And here you have, sorry, I don't draw really well, but you have Korea, and then kind of here you have China. But here, there's a lot of resources, and to pursue their economical development, they needed more natural resources. And they were also afraid that by their population growing, they would lack some space for their people. So they went over there and they fought Russia coming from there, and they defeated them. So they took control over this place. And we will see that after in 1933, or sorry if the dates are not accurate, but it's about this time. They fought a war here to go to China, but we'll study this later. So they fought a war here, and they pursued their economical development. And what happened is in 1929, there was the Great Depression. And at this time, their economy was, before the Great Depression, Japanese economy was great. They had a lot of exportation, they traded a lot, and they made a lot of money. And the problem is that with the Great Depression, other countries, they stopped buying Japanese product. They focused more on their own economy. So their exportation plummeted. They went down. And so they didn't make as much money as they used to. So the problem is, without the foreign money coming to their economy, they figured out that they need to build a strong self-sufficiency for their own economy. And because they lacked the natural resources on their territory, they seek those natural resources to China and to the East Indies. It's about here. What they wanted was oil. They needed oil to allow their navy to work and their economy to continue growing. So they attacked China, and rapidly they took control over half of the Chinese territory. And they also attacked some island in the East Indies. And the problem with those attacks is that it didn't really, the US, they were not seeing those actions with a good eye. This expansionism was not something US was happy about. And there's also another problem. The other problem is that Japan at this time, they were having more and more nationalists behavior and more militaristic behavior. It's the military that took control over the country and started the invasion of China and of those East Indies. But the problem is that at some point, United States, they decided they have to take an action. And the problem is that United States during World War I, they attacked Germany and they lost a lot of soldiers. And after, I think it was in 1934, there was a public investigation, and to understand the United States, they have the Monroe Doctrine, I think it's the name. And the Monroe Doctrine is basically we don't interfere with European economies, countries, and government, but European and Western countries, they don't interfere with the America. America to the Americans and Europe to the Europeans. But the problem is that with their military intervention in Germany, they didn't respect their own Monroe Doctrine, and they lost a lot of soldiers. And in 1944, there was a public investigation that revealed that the reason why United States they attacked Germany was to defend financial institutions and to allow the military-industrial complex to make more money. It's the, I think it's the Nye investigation, NYE, something like this. And maybe I will make a video one day about this subject. And so the problem is that the public opinion was against any form of intervention outside outside America. So what they did was they declared an economic embargo on Japan. So they stopped the exportation of copper and iron first. They stopped the exportation of iron and copper first to say to the Japanese, okay, we know that you have some expansionist behavior, but you have to stop because this is not okay. We will not let you expand yourself indefinitely without doing something. So now we will try to stop you with copper and iron embargo. But the problem is that it didn't stop the Japanese. The Japanese is controlled by military, and military, they are not really interested by peace. They want to secure their self-sufficiency, and they also want to secure their trade routes because they are receiving a lot of its essential resources from the seas. So they had a great navy, but the problem is that by declaring an embargo, the United States Navy is kind of closing those trade routes. So the problem is that this embargo didn't stop Japan. So US had to go one step further. They had to put an embargo on oil exportation on Japan. And the problem is Japan relies heavily on its navy, and its navy relies heavily on oil. And Japan, they made calculations. They figured out that they have about 1 year of strategical reserves of oil, but this is not enough. They have to do something. If they don't do anything, their economy will die, and Japan will die with this embargo. So the plan of the military and the Japanese government was to, what they wanted was to take control about those East Indies, because there was a lot of oil here, and if they could control those islands and secure the trade routes, they could secure their oil supply from those islands. But the problem is that here in this area you had a lot of American Navy, and one of their bases was Hawaii. And so what Japanese decided was to take a surprise attack, a massive attack on Hawaii to destroy the US Navy in order to secure their oil supply from the East Indies. And if they destroy the Navy, the US Navy won't bother them when they want to bring this oil back to Japan. So they attacked US, and it was the Pearl Harbor attack. And several thousand US soldiers died, and after this attack, well, in every newspaper there was photos of this attack, and so the public opinion that was at the beginning against any American intervention in Japan, after the Pearl Harbor attack, they were okay to let the government attack Japan. So this is where US declared war to Japan. And so this is the main idea, but you have also some controversial theories about this Pearl Harbor attack. The thing is, there is a theory that says that the United States government was aware of the intention of Japan to attack Hawaii and to attack the US Navy. But the problem is, if they moved their navy from Hawaii and the navy wasn't destroyed, they wouldn't have any reason to attack Japan, and public opinion was against any intervention in Japan. And the thing is, if they were able to declare war to Japan, this would allow the financial institutions and the military-industrial complex to make huge amounts of money. So there is a theory that says that they allowed Japan to destroy their navy to be able to respond and to attack Japan and to destroy Japan, and then after that put a democratic government here, liberal democracy, but we will speak about this a bit later in this video. And this was part of the strategy. And why does this Pearl Harbor attack failed? It was because Japan, they make wrong calculations. They wanted to destroy the entire US Navy, but the entire US Navy was not at this time in Hawaii. You had, I think, 2 or 3 aircraft carriers that were in the sea, not in Hawaii, so they didn't got destroyed. And they also made a mistake that they destroyed the navy, but they didn't destroy the infrastructure allowing to repair the damaged ships and the damaged infrastructure. So this allowed United States to recover much more easily and much faster than what they thought, and so they were able to attack Japan back without allowing Japan to secure its supply lines of oil. And this is the second example of a growing power. In this example, you have a growing power that has more and more imperialistic ambitions, and by putting economic sanctions on the Japanese economy, United States, they were able to manipulate them to make Japan attack them, to have a reason to then fight back and destroy Japan. So this is our second example of the Thucydides War. Now I will erase this and we will see how this Thucydides Trap applied to the World War I declaration between Germany and it was not basically the beginning of World War I. So now the case of United Kingdom versus Germany. So at this time, the global power is the United Kingdom. And at this time, in the beginning of the 20th century, what determines your power is your navy. And well, the British, they have the most powerful navy, the Royal Navy, and this is what allowed them to be wealthy and be able to have a great military power. This allowed them to have a lot of colonies over the world and to kind of rule the seas because they had what they called the two-power standard. They wanted their navy to be at least as powerful as the two navies below the United Kingdom. So it could be stronger boats or just have more boats than the two competitors below the British Navy. And you also have Germany. Germany at this time, they don't really have colony and they are a bit late regarding their development. And the reason why is before, I think it was in the middle of the 19th century, Germany was not a unique state. It was a lot of small kingdoms and they were not united. And the problem is that those small kingdoms, they were not able to compete with the power of the United Kingdom. They had their own problems, so they didn't really develop any navy. And the only kingdoms that could be able to develop navy were, at this time, it was the coastal kingdoms, and they had other problems. But there's a name named Otto von Bismarck. That with some genius moves, he was able to unify Germany and allow Germany to start its second industrial revolution. And so by allowing Germany to unite, Germany was able to achieve huge economic growth. Its population from the middle of the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century, the beginning of the First World War, its population almost doubled. And I think it went from 30 millions to something close to 65 million, something like this. They earn at least 30 million people, and they also started to develop their economy, their exportation. There are some information saying that between 19 and 1914, Germany, they won, I think it was 18 Nobel Prizes. Whereas the British, they only won half of they only won about 9 Nobel Prizes. So this is to show you how Germany had a huge economical development, a huge demographical development, and huge innovations and huge engineers. And the thing is, there are many reasons that conduced to a war, and there is at least 3 problems. The first problem is that Germany is surrounded by France and Russia. And those two, they are allies. And you also have the king that is Wilhelm II, that has a great anger toward its British family. And you also have a third problem, that Germany is kind of late in its colony development. They don't have any colony because they couldn't focus on the acquisition of new colonies, because before being united, they had other problems they had to resolve before being able to focus on their colony. And so, to start with the colony problem, Germany, they have a huge economic development, and they see other powerful countries that are making a lot of money through their colonies. So they want to develop a great navy to be able to have their own colonies and to obviously be able to make money from those colonies. And so this is one of the reasons they want to develop a navy. And there is another problem that is closely related to the Thucydides Trap, is Wilhelm II. Wilhelm II is the king of Germany, but the problem is it has half of his family is British, and from his mother. And the thing is that when he was born, there was some problem. He was born with a disabled arm. So one of his arm was 15 centimeters shorter than the other, and he could barely use it. It was kind of a disability, and he was born with a crippled arm. And this led him with a huge inferiority complex. And at this time, Germany was really military and really focused on the manpower, and having a disability was not seen as something good. So he tried to compensate this disability with huge propension to military behavior. They said he was really provocative, arrogant, and the problem is that he used to go and see his family in the United Kingdom. And United Kingdom, they had the Royal Navy, and it was the most powerful navy on the world. And with his behavior, nobody really liked him in his British family. And he always felt a bit inferior comparing to its British family. And so when he became adult, he wanted to develop a huge navy to be able to be seen as a great leader from its British family. And so he said that at the very beginning, the reason why he developed this navy was, I want to develop my navy to be able to acquire some colonies and to develop my economy. But at some point, the German navy became so powerful that the British general, they understood that it was not just for their colonies, it was also to be able to compete with the Royal Navy. And the thing with this navy development, the German, they knew that their navy, they knew that it would be really difficult for them to develop a better navy than the British Navy. But what they wanted was just a navy to be able to compete and not to be just easily destroyed by the British Navy. And the third problem about the war between UK and Germany is the alliance between France and Russia. The thing is, Germany is surrounded by France at the, let me draw you. Here you have Germany, and here you have France, and here you have Russia. And the thing is, Germany, they have some imperialist behavior, but those imperialist behavior are kind of stopped because as they are surrounded by two powerful countries, Germany knows that if they attack Russia, they will be attacked by France. And if they attack France, they will be attacked by Russia. But there is an important point. There is a plan called I think it's the Schieffelin plan. And this is a military strategy to take over Russia and France and without being crushed by any of the two powers. The thing is, the plan is to attack France first and rapidly destroy France, and then move the German army to the Russian frontier. Why? Because France is more developed than Russia at this time, so they could mobilize bring their army to the frontier really easily and really fast because they had railways and infrastructures allowing the displacement of huge amounts of soldiers in a really short period of time. But Russia, it was not the case of Russia. They calculated that Russia needed more than 1 month to bring their soldiers to the German frontier. And if you remember well, in the beginning of the 20th century, I think it was in 1904, there was a war between Japan and Russia. So Russia had to send its soldiers to the east, where not near Korea and stuff. And they got destroyed by Japan. So their army was destroyed, so they had to rebuild it. But the thing is, Russia grew extremely rapidly, and the German military officers, they calculated and they figured out that by 1917 the Russian army will be fully back and it would be impossible to defeat the Russian army. So if they wanted to do something, they had to take an action before this date. And in Europe at this time, there is a huge feeling that a war will happen because every country started to develop its army heavily, and until, as we know, the assassination of the Austro-Hungarian Archduke. I don't know if we can say it, but it's Francois Ferdinand. And he was assassinated in Serbia, and well, by a game of alliance, it started a war, because at this time Germany, they said to the Austro-Hungarian Empire that were their ally, and Serbia was the ally of Russia. Germany said to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, do whatever you want, we will back you up. If anything wrong happens, we're here. And there is an interesting story so what happened was that the Austro-Hungarian Empire declared war to Serbia, and then Russia declared war to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then Germany, they came to war too with Russia. But they didn't attack Russia first. They first invaded France through Belgium. But there is an interesting fact that you had Wilhelm II, and the Tsar of Russia, I think it was Nicholas something, I don't remember the name. And before the war started, they exchanged some messages, and they were begging each other to retreat their army from the frontier, to not start a war. But the interesting thing is that they were leaders, and they were begging each other to do not start a war. None of them wanted a war. But the question then is, who is in charge then? If none of them wants a war, and who is in charge, and who is, well, deciding to start a war? And from what we know, it's the army and the generals that took control, and they said, well, the engine is started, and the war engine is started, and we cannot stop it now. But knowing this, we can question ourselves whether or not some other interests were involved in this situation, and who would have interest to start a war at this time. And we will answer this question that is really interesting, but if I answer it today, the video will be too long. But now for the Thucydides Trap dynamic, we see how the growing Germany, and with its growing population, its growing army, and its growing, and also with the inferiority complex of their leader, that were the main reasons that this conflict exploded and started, because this emerging power wanted some recognition, and for them the only way to get this recognition was through war. So this is the second example of a Thucydides trap that led to a war. Now we will focus on the China and United States situation, and we will study 5 scenarios that could lead to a war between those two powers. So now let's see the rivalry between US and China. And I already made a video about the Chinese economic miracle, and I invite you to see this if you want to have more details about the Chinese economic miracle. But to summarize and to have the main ideas, since 1970, the Chinese economic growth was incredibly fast and incredibly strong. It was so strong that now its economy is, the analysts, they predict that Chinese economy will overtake the American economy by 2035. And if you look at some different indicators like the GDP at equivalent PPP, it means purchasing price power, the Chinese economy already overtook the American economy. And the thing is, China, they have a huge economic development. They are trying to escape the middle income trap. And we also studied this middle income trap in a video on my channel. If you want, you can see it. But the question is, with this economic development, with those innovations the China is having, what does China want? China wants basically to restore its empire. China, if you forget the century of humiliation, we will talk about this. Was always a great empire. And the thing is, now they want to have a strong, their objectives is to have a strong economy. So it's economy. They want to resolve the problem of Hong Kong and obviously Taiwan. And they want to rebuild their army. Those are the main objectives, and obviously become the first economic power, but this is in the economic point. So these are their main objectives. They want to restore the Chinese power and also restore their historical influence in East Asia. The thing is, if you look at historically the history of China and how the system used to work, they used to be really influent in East Asia, and they were basically the central empire in East Asia. And in Chinese, they say Zhongguo and I think it means empire of the middle. And so by the middle, they mean that all the other countries, they refer to China as the leading power of this sector. And they had a tribute economy. I don't know if it's the right word, but at this time, China was, before the century of humiliation, China was a huge empire. And the other countries that wanted to trade with China, they had to accept that China was the global power and they had to pay a fee to China. But the fee was just a symbol, because by paying the fee, the Chinese emperor sends a lot of gifts to the country, and the value of the gift was higher than the money they paid to the Chinese empire. And also the benefits they were able to make through trade with China were huge compared to the money they paid to kind of recognize their power. The money they used to pay was just to recognize the power of the Chinese empire and to accept that they were not as powerful as China. And now the man in charge of China is Xi Jinping. And the question is to understand in what direction China wants to go. If we try to understand who he is, we could have an idea of where China is going. And Xi Jinping is the son of a Chinese elite. So his father was in the government during the Mao era. But the problem is when Mao started its Cultural Revolution, he started to fire a lot of elites from its government because he was afraid that some of them were not loyal or corrupted. And so he sent the Xi Jinping's father to jail. So he went, I think it was when he was 10 years old, he went when he was 10 years old, his father was arrested under Mao, and a few years later he went to the countryside and he went with his half-sister and he worked in the countryside, and unfortunately conditions were too hard, so its half-sister committed suicide. So this gives you an idea of how he became an adult. And when he came back from the countryside, he went to the university and he was able to integrate the Chinese Communist Party. And he was in a small city. He was sent to a small city to be kind of the governor of this small city, and he had huge results, and slowly he earned his stripes, and he became in 2012, I think, succeeded to it's Hu Jintao, and at this time he was at the head of the Chinese Communist Party. And so now we understand a bit more, and he hates corruption. He's not really, if you look at his public speeches, he's not really showing signs of money. He's focused on the economy of its country. At least this is what we see. And so his principal fear, the principal thing that he fears is that ending up as the Soviet Union. He is afraid that China could end as the Soviet Union. And for him, the reason why the Soviet Union collapsed for Xi Jinping is for three reasons. The first one is that Soviet Union, they released their control over their population before ending their economic growth. And the second error that the Soviet Union made was that they allowed too much corruption into the party, and so the people they lost their faith into the party, And the last point was that he nationalized the army. So the army pledged allegiance to the nation and not to the Communist Party. So it left a party without army, so a defenseless party basically. And for him, during the Chinese Revolution in 1989, the problem was that China was taking dangerously, for him, the same trajectory as the Soviet Union when it collapsed. So what he did was he changed everything when he came at the head of the Communist Party in 2012. He started by firing a lot of corrupt elements of the party. And to give you an example, especially in the military forces, when you entered the military forces, before he fired everyone, and some of them were sent to jail for corruption and things like this. But before, when you were into the army, you could pay money to some officials to get a higher rank. So this is an example to show you how corrupt China at this time was. The problem though is why Chinese people, why do they accept those control by the party over the people? The thing is the social contract. For Xi Jinping, the Chinese social contract is the following for the people. The contract is Xi Jinping. He says, I bring you growth. I bring you economic growth. I will make you wealthy and rich, and I will give you good living conditions. But in exchange, you just forget to be involved in the political decisions. So I decide the political decisions, and you trust me to bring you growth. And so it works well as long as Xi Jinping is able to bring growth to the Chinese people. And the Chinese economy started to slow down a bit the last few years. And if you look at the Chinese economy, and especially its army, you can guess that they are expecting, because if their army was only focused on building tanks and I don't know trucks and stuff like this, and forgetting about its navy, you could expect that China is overseeing a conflict, a ground conflict. But this is the exact opposite. China is focusing its military development on its navy. So what you can guess is that the Chinese officials, they are anticipating a conflict on the seas. And if you look at the Chinese geography, this is kind of logical, because China is surrounded, I don't know if I can draw you, yeah. Let's say China is this, and here you have Korea, and here you have the south with Vietnam and Southeast Asia, and here you have Taiwan, and here the Japan. The thing is, here you have a lot of mountains. Here you have North Korea, and you have Russia here, and you have also Mongolia here. This is not dangerous power for the Chinese government. So, because here it's really hard to cross, especially here. Here, you cannot attack China from here. This is impossible. And this is not there. You have desert. It's really not inhabited. The major population of China lives near the coast here. So what they expect is if there is a war, the war could come from the seas. And according to their military development, this is what they expect. And the thing is, the military problem can express itself in a few different manners. And the thing is, you can submit China without fighting against China. You just cut its supply lines, and you just, as the United States did with Japan, you cut its supply lines, and then China becomes isolated, and their economy dies. So the social contract is not respected anymore. So people would start to rebel against the Communist Party. And so the solution the Chinese government found is the One Belt, One Road project. And this is railways that goes from China to the rest of Europe, and to India, to Iran, and even to Africa. And this allows China to it strengthens the self-sufficiency of China, because by building those railways, China will be able to diversify its supply lines and not only rely on the seas to get its resources, and to its importations and its exportations, because a lot of things are coming in from here, but a lot of things are coming out too, as the Chinese economy is heavily oriented towards exportations. And so this is the main idea of China. If there's a war, especially with the United States, it would be a war on the seas. And I think that today China has more warships in number, not as they don't have the same innovation level as the US ships, but they have more ships than the US. And this brings us to our second point, is that you have two political scientists. You have, I think it's a man named Huntington, and you have its disciple named Francis Fukuyama. And what does those two people say? The first one, Huntington, he says that after the Cold War, most of the conflict and most of the wars will be caused because of civilization difference and cultural differences. And because some cultures are too different, they cannot coexist together. And for Francis Fukuyama, it's the inverse. He says that the end of history is liberal democracy, and he says that liberal democracy is the end of the world. It's the most advanced model available, and it's the only model available that allows people to live peacefully. And for him, this model should spread all over the world. But for many analysts, if China would become a democracy, this would lead to the end of China. China does not fit democracy, and if you have democracy in China, China will be just destroyed. But to give you an example of this civilization difference, there's an interesting story in 1793. there was a British man that went to China. He wanted to open trade routes between Britain and China. So he went to see the emperor of China and to tell him, okay, let's open, I would like you to open trade routes and trade ports for our product to come to China, and we would like to also buy some Chinese products. So he went to see the emperor, and the emperor said, okay, so the Chinese emperor considered himself as the son of the sky. So he said to the British man, you have to put your forehead to the ground in order to show respect to me, and this will show that you accept that I'm superior than you. And so for the British man, this was not in his culture, so he said, I won't do that. I won't put my forehead to the ground in front of you, but if you want, I can put my knee on the ground in front of you, and a Chinese official that is the same rank as me will put a knee to the ground in front of the photo of the King of England. And so the Chinese, when he said that, the Chinese laughed at him, and he said, this man is crazy. And they told him, among all the things he asked, for example, opening new trade routes, opening a port, creating an embassy, the Chinese just said, we're not interested. We're not interested, and you should just leave and go back to your country before the cold season starts. So this is a way to show you how Chinese people, they think. They don't. This is the main difference between US and China. The main difference between US and China is China refuse conflict. What they want is a peaceful and harmonious coexistence. And whereas US, they want to impose their model. We saw it in Iraq, in Afghanistan, where they failed to impose their model. And for the US, the main values are liberty, equality, individualism, and democracy. Sorry, I write it a bit bad. For China, it's totally different. You have respect of authority. They refuse the conflict. It's the society over it's the party over society, and the society over individuals. So this is two radically different point of view and vision of the world. And there is a great comparison between the Chinese way of seeing the world and seeing the conflict, and the US way to seeing the world and to resolve conflicts. The Chinese, they want as much as possible to avoid conflicts. They don't like it's. If you wrote the Art of the War by Sun Tzu, it gives you an idea, and he says in its book, it's better to win over an opponent without even fighting with him. If you submit your opponent without fighting him, it's the best way to win a war. And this is kind of their philosophy. And this can be, you can have an image of this opposition with the chess strategy and the Go strategy. You know, Go, it's the game where you have the white and the black, and it's a Chinese game, and you have to eat the pieces of your opponent. And this is radically different. In chess, you have to be aggressive, you have to control the center, and the more aggressive you are and the more control over the center you have, the better it is, and the better your position, the better the situation is for you. If you control the center, if you are aggressive, well, there is a good chance that you can win the game. It's not 100% true, but it's the main idea. When you play chess, one of the three rules that they tell you when you begin is control the center, develop your pieces, and secure your king. Whereas in the Go game, being too aggressive will make you lose the game. Because if you are too aggressive, the extremity, you will leave weaknesses on the side of the board. And those weaknesses will be used by your opponent to submit you and to encircle you, and then to submit you, and then obviously to win over their opponent. So this is two radically opposed vision of the world, and it's two different philosophy. United States are focused on direct conflict. They want to resolve their problems as soon as possible. Whereas China, they have the time, they are relaxed, and they are able to wait and see and take action according to the moves of their opponent, or here the other government. So now that we understand a bit more the way of thinking of the Chinese Communist Party, we will see 5 scenarios that could lead to a war between China and US. So now we are going to see 5 scenarios that could lead to war between China and the United States. First of all, we have to know that wars like fires, forest fires are usually not created by criminals. It's like wars, they're usually created by a set of conditions that added together, they bring the ideal conditions for a fire to start. Usually it's those set of conditions, they start with an accidental condition, for example, someone making a barbecue in the forest and forgetting to clear the ashes well, and so and the person leaves, and because the weather is really dry and there is no rainy day, and there was no rainy day since maybe 2 weeks, and it's super hot during the summer, well, this is the ideal conditions for a fire to start. And the scenarios we are going to see are a bit like this. It's usually not a single power starting a war out of nothing. There's usually a set of conditions, and each step brings the two powers closer and closer to war. And there's also an important point we have to mention about the United States. If we look at the last 4 wars US was involved in, so we have Vietnam, we have Korea, we have Iraq, and we have Afghanistan. And we have Iran, but Iran is a bit too it's a bit too fresh to be studied. So we are not going to look at the Iran case. So if we look at the Vietnam case, we can clearly say that the US lost in Vietnam. If we look at Korea, it was at best it was a draw, because they were able to destroy North Korea, but North Korea was helped by the Chinese, and so the frontier between the two Korea did not move. So it's a draw. And if we look at Iraq and Afghanistan, they lost. Why? Because they were able to destroy completely Iraq and Afghanistan, but they were not able to put a democratic government into those two countries. So Iraq and Afghanistan were destroyed, and because Iraq was destroyed, it allowed the development of several terrorist organizations such as Daesh, and in Afghanistan they failed to put their liberal democracy. So now it's the Taliban that are ruling the country. So out of the last 4 wars they fought, they almost lost all of them. So this is not something really in favor of the US. And so now the first scenario that we are going to study is about a set of accident that occurs in the sea and end up in war. And the first major problem, and as we saw, China is preparing itself for a war in the seas, and so this is related to our first case. So if we have 2 boats entering in collision together, we will see how this could lead to a war. So we have to know that in the international seas near China and near Japan and near East Indies, there's a lot of US ships out there. And near Taiwan too. And Chinese government, they think, and it's probably true, that some of those US ships are there to spy the military movement of the Chinese army and to locate their where they store their missiles. And it's kind of reconnaissance missions, military recon missions. So Chinese obviously are not happy with US ships being in the international waters of China. And the example they give is, imagine we sent an aircraft carrier near Cuba or in the Bahamas. Well, US will be pretty angry about this. So the scenario we are going to look at is, imagine you have a US ship that is coming too close to the Chinese coast. And so the boat is getting into the Chinese water, not the international water. And so the ship is going, and so Chinese officials, they decide to intercept this boat. Or no, they decide to make it, to force this ship to make a U-turn, so to turn back. So what they do is they send a smaller ship maybe from the coastal guards to cut the ship's road, so to force the boat to make a U-turn. But the thing is, the US boat refuses to make the U-turn. So basically what happens is that the ship destroys the Chinese ship. And here, several options are available for China. The first one is to basically do nothing and just condemn this behavior on the international scene. But this would show the world that Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party is a chicken, which is not acceptable for the public opinion, and Chinese people would be pretty angry if this happened. So the other option is to destroy the US boat, the US ship. So by destroying the US ship, it's kind of a declaration of war. So this is not acceptable too. So in-between solution would be to intercept the soldiers of this ship and bring them in China to judge them and send them to jail in China. But then this is the option they choose. But then you have the vision of the US. Now they know that if they don't do anything, their soldiers will be captured and there will be the chicken. And the problem is this would send a pretty bad message to US allies, especially Philippines and Japan. This would give a weak image of the United States if they don't do anything. So they cannot really afford to do nothing. The other option is to intercept the Chinese boat and get the soldiers back and destroy the boat. But this would be kind of a declaration of war too. The second option is to prevent Chinese army to intercept their boat and to get their boat back. And this option, to realize that to make this happen, they would have to send aircrafts to so the Chinese ships would be afraid of those aircraft, thinking that they would destroy them. So, and this would leave enough time to intercept their own boat and bring it back into international waters. And let's imagine that this is the solution that the United States choose. The problem is you have Chinese officials seeing some aircrafts coming toward their ships, and well, they don't know it's just a dissuasion, and they are not attacking, they just want to make the ships go back. So they are afraid of an attack, so they launch anti-aircraft missiles and they destroy one of the aircrafts. And well, the problem is that by destroying one of the aircraft, you have all the images, all the videos on the US news. And well, they have to respond to this aggression. So what the US officials do, they fire air-ground missiles to the Chinese reserve of ground, air, and anti-ship missiles to destroy their missiles, basically. But the thing is, as they start destroying the Chinese missiles, they know that if they don't fire their missiles, they are just going to have their missiles destroyed. So they fire their missiles to US ships that are into the international waters, and they destroy half of the navy that is in range of those missiles, and they destroy also an aircraft carrier. And all the soldiers in the aircraft carrier, they die. So several thousand people and US soldiers die because of this attack. And at this point, they cannot avoid a total war because the US opinion will be deeply shocked about this tragedy, and they will be in favor of a military intervention in China in revenge of what they did. So, well, even if it's not the most likely scenario, it's still one of the scenarios that could happen and could lead to a war between China and US. And now let's see the second scenario that is about Taiwan, which is one of the most likely scenario that could lead to a war between US and China. So the second scenario is about Taiwan. And for those of you who don't know, Taiwan was a Chinese territory since always. It was a Chinese territory, but when there was the communist revolution, the Chinese communists, they fought against the Chinese nationalists. And basically what happened is that communists, they won a lot of territory, and Chinese nationalists, they retreat to Taiwan, and this is where they established a government, and this is what remains of this Chinese nationalist movement, and they established their government in Taiwan. But for the communists and the Chinese Communist Party, Taiwan is part of China, and they consider Taiwan as part of China, but they know they want to fix the Taiwan problem, but they are not in a hurry to fix the Taiwan problem. Some analysts say that before 2049, which is the 100th birthday of the Chinese Communist Party, they want to find a solution to the Taiwan problem. And now, how can this Taiwan problem could lead to a war between China and US? Let's imagine a situation where you have some protests in Hong Kong. And you have a lot of protests, but the problem is the government is cracking down these protests with a lot of violence to kind of crack down all of the protesters. And the thing is, Taiwanese people, they see this behavior, and in the public opinion of Taiwan, they say, look at what Chinese government is doing to Hong Kong, and this behavior shows us that they are never going to leave us to be independent from China. So we have to do something in order to be independent. And so what the Taiwan government do? They went to the US to beg for help and to beg the US to recognize their independence and to have their own seat in the United Nations. And since the creation of the United Nations, Taiwan is tied to the Chinese seat at the United Nations. So they asked the US to have their own seat at the United Nations. And this obviously irritates the Chinese officials. They are pretty angry about this Taiwan behavior because they don't want Taiwan to be recognized as an independent state. So what they do, they start to launch here you have the coast of China, let's say, and Taiwan is here. It's not so far from Chinese coast. But as Taiwan is an island, Taiwan is getting all its resources from the seas. So what Chinese government could do is to send some missiles here in the Taiwanese waters to cut off the supply of, to cut off the importations of Taiwan, to put pressure on the Taiwanese economy. And this already happened. So if they do that, Taiwan will be facing a lot of difficulties because their supply lines will be blocked because of those missiles launched. And this will put a lot of pressure into their economy. 70% of the food they are of the food the Taiwanese people are consuming is imported. So this will put a lot of pressure on Taiwanese people. So they went to they go to see the US to seek for help, and they beg for help of the US. So and the US, what they could do to help Taiwan is to escort the ships into the sea, creating a safe corridor to allow the supply lines to be restored. And the problem is they announced that they are going to escort the ships and protect the supply lines. But the problem is China is refusing to stop its missile launching, and these lines are going across some region where missiles from the Chinese government are launched. And unfortunately, at some point, one of the missiles hits a US ship. And by hitting a US ship, US government and the public opinion is deeply shocked. And so they decide to, as a revenge, to send some missiles to their missile stores, where Chinese government stores anti-ship missiles, to destroy those missiles to avoid further destruction of their ships. But the problem is, as we saw in the previous example, when you take one step toward the war, it's hard to do not end in a total war, because by destroying those anti-ship missiles, China will have the solution to either look at those missiles being destroyed or to send the remaining anti-ship missiles to destroy the most ships they can before the missiles are destroyed. So this is obviously what they will do. But the problem is that by doing this, United States will retaliate and they will attack back until it ends up in a total war. So because of Taiwan, US and China, they end up in a total war. And this is our second scenario. The third scenario is a scenario where US and China, they start a war, but because of a third party entity. And we will see this scenario. So the third scenario is about a third party entity bringing US and China into a war. You have to know that in the seas between China and Japan, there are some islands that China and Japan are claiming ownership of. Both of them are claiming the ownership of those islands because most analysts believe that those islands there are a lot of oil reserves into those islands. So both of the countries, they want to they claim the ownership of those islands. The problem is, and the problem is not solved. None of them accepted the ownership of the other country. So it's an open problem. But let's imagine, for whatever reason, there's a group of Japanese nationalists not related to the government, but just Japanese nationalists. They went on those islands and they start building structures, and not huge structures, but they claim the ownership of those islands and they start building stuff. And the problem is Chinese military, they notice them, and well, they send guard posts to capture those nationalists and to judge them in China. But the problem is the Japanese officials, they don't want their citizens to be intercepted by Chinese government and be judged in China, because for the Japanese government, those islands are Japanese territory. So before the Chinese ship reach the island, they intercept those Chinese ships and they send the army to occupy the islands and claim the ownership of the island. The problem is China deploys its navy in the area, and so do Japan. Japan also deploys its navy into the area, and Japan went to USA to seek help because they have a mutual defense agreement, and so US have to defend Japan in case of a problem. So US, they accept to send an aircraft carrier to patrol into the area. The problem is the area becomes overcrowded. There is a lot of ships, a lot of ships. And at some point, we don't know who starts this attack, but there is a cyber attack on the Japanese Navy. So basically, all the Japanese ships, they become blind and they don't see anything. And at this point, the US guess that they are blinding the Japanese Navy in order to start an attack. And we will see this in a future video, but the first mover advantage is huge in war. So they decide to, instead of waiting for the Chinese army to attack those blinded ships, they attack first, and they attack the launching sites of Chinese anti-ship missiles. So US, it was written here, they attack Chinese missile reserves. And so, well, as you know, this is the first step toward the war, but China, instead of seeing all their missiles being destroyed, they try to destroy as many as US ships and Japanese ships as possible, and this starts a total war because of Japan. So Japan was the reason why this war started. This is not what will happen. This is just a scenario. We are guessing. You have to imagine. And the fourth scenario is about a country we all know, North Korea. And I will write it here because I have some space left. The thing with North Korea is you have Kim Jong-un, which is the Korean leader right now. The problem is he doesn't have a son to come after him. And so let's guess he leaves the power. The problem is if he leaves, there's a lot there are a lot of military factions that are interested in take control of the country. But the problem is that if those military factions take control over the country, North Korea is a nuclear power. And, well, let's say Kim Jong-un is not here anymore, and for whatever reason, one of the military factions took control over North Korea. We have several scenarios of what those military factions could do. The first one is to attack South Korea. And, well, let's imagine the North Korean, they start an attack against South Korea. And it's not Kim Jong-un anymore. It's military factions that are out of control. The thing is, if South Korea, they will seek help from the US, and US will help them. But the problem is, if North Korea, they start to get crushed by the US, they could possibly start to think about using nuclear weapons. And the thing is, or maybe they could have the idea to sell some part of their nuclear weapons to terrorist organizations. In any ways, the problem is that those nuclear weapons are a great threat to the area. So Chinese government, they will send their special forces into the North Korean territory to seize the nuclear weapons of North Korea. But the problem is, as South Korea and US, they destroyed North Korea, well, what happens is that both of US and China, they send their special forces to seize the nuclear weapon of North Korea. And what happens is a direct confrontation between those two special forces into the North Korean territory, which ends up in a total war. So this is one possible scenario about the North Korean problem. Another scenario about North Korea that doesn't involve South Korea is that you have military factions that are taking control over the country, but the problem is that the informations both US and China have is that they are planning to sell those nuclear weapons to terrorists. So, well, both of them, they decide to send their special forces to take control of the nuclear weapons of North Korea. But the problem is that where the nuclear weapons are stored, the two special forces, they meet together, and what they think is that was an ambush from the other country to attack the special force of the other country. So US, they believe that this was an ambush to allow China to attack their special forces. So this special force scenario, it's not really likely, but it's some possibility in regard of the instability of the North Korean regime. These two scenarios, it's mostly about Kim Jong-un leaving military factions at the head of North Korea, and we don't really know what decisions they will take about the situation, especially about South Korea. So leaving those military factions at the head of North Korea would be pretty risky. So this is why it could lead to a direct conflict between China and the United States. So for the last scenario, let's see how an economic war could lead to a total war between China and the United States. Let's imagine we have a US government that wants to reduce the trade deficits between US and China. So some of the leverages they could use is, first one, declare China as a country that is manipulating its currency. So currency manipulator. By doing this, it allows the US to conduct some investigations about the behavior of China regarding its currency and how it could manipulate its currency, the yuan. And this is not speculative. China is proven to have manipulated its currency to keep the yuan low, to make it easier for to make Chinese exportation cheaper for the other countries, and this is a way to become more competitive in the international scene, because as your currency is cheaper, it's cheaper to buy Chinese products, whereas it's more expensive to buy US products. It costs less to produce your goods in China, so it becomes more attractive for companies to produce in China and then ship their goods back to the US. But this killed the industry, the US-based industry. So they qualify China as a country manipulating its currency. And they also put some heavy tariffs on Chinese importation, let's say 50%. And this already happened. And what they also denounce is that China is stealing intellectual property of Western countries, especially US. They are basically stealing US innovations. To give you an example, there is a company creating nuclear plants. I think it's Westinghouse. And they offered China to build them some nuclear plants. But the rule in China is that a foreign company cannot on its own run a business in China. It has to be associated with a Chinese company in order to be allowed to create, for example, a nuclear plant. But the thing is, they built several nuclear plants, but after some cyber attacks and some data leaks, they didn't ask Westinghouse to build their additional nuclear plants. They started building their own nuclear plants, but they were strangely really inspired by the technology of the Westinghouse nuclear plants. So they basically steal their intellectual property. And there's also a problem with, I think it's with Xiaomi or Huawei about the 5G. There is a problem with 5G also, but basically the strategy of China is stealing other countries' intellectual property, and they recreate what the others created, but they recreate it cheaper. And we also have an aggressive strategy about solar panels. They heavily gave money to solar panel industry in order to create really cheap solar panels, and in order to take they control 80% now of the solar panels market, and they were able to kill the competitors because they received a lot of money from the government. And now that the competitors are killed, they can do whatever they want with the market. It's almost a monopoly. But so to come back to our scenario, they impose some 50% tariffs, and they ask China to reimburse $1.5 trillion because they say it's the price to pay for stealing our intellectual property, and this is the money you must give us in order to compensate the stealing of our intellectual property. Obviously, this makes the Chinese government very angry, and strangely, there is a cyber attack on US banks. And this cyber attack, it destroys basically all of the accounts of the customer accounts of the US customer accounts. So basically this puts the United States in a huge chaos, because imagine tomorrow you wake up and you go to see your bank app to see how many money you have left into your account, and you see zero because the bank was hacked and they lost any accountability to be able to tell you how much money you have left. And so it puts a lot of pressure on the US government. Chaos spread everywhere, and investigation, they show that this attack came from a hacker's headquarters in Shanghai. So what US decides is they are going to send a drone that will be flying from Japan to Shanghai to destroy this building, to destroy this hacker's building in revenge of what they did to the US economy. So this is what they do. They send a drone and they destroy this building. But the thing is, China, they knew from where this drone came from, what was the takeoff point of this drone, and it was in Japan. So in revenge, what China does is that they send some missiles to the US base from where the drone took off the ground, and they destroy the base. And so what happens is that a lot of Japanese soldiers die and a lot of US soldiers die. And this is the first step towards total war between US and China, and maybe also Japan, because in this scenario, Japan is involved too. So this gives us kind of an overview of the Thucydides Trap and how this little step could lead to a total war between US and China, sorry.